So the experience is identical. From a cortical perspective, it looks exactly the same, whether the input comes from tissue damage or whether it comes from learning and integration of all these other circuits. The patient can't tell the difference. It's not going to look any different from the outside. But the things that will fix it, you can do whatever you want to that patient's back at this point in time. If the tissue damage is gone and that's not what's driving the pain, it's not going to do any good, right? Can't cut it out. You can't, fix that piece. You've got to find where the other inputs are that are amplifying signals, that are sending information through the brain to cause that pain experience. And so you got to think about, basically, your treatments have to address those learned components of pain, and not just focus on the tissue injury. Because most patients don't understand this. A lot of doctors don't understand this. Unless you help them understand that the pain they're experiencing may not mean that their back is a mess, they're not going to guess that. We've seen some miracle cases, essentially, where all it took was explaining this general concept. Like I remember one patient, we were doing cognitive behavioral therapy with him. He got a half an hour lecture that explained that your pain is not, it's not all your back injury. And he had really bad hip damage, had been told by his doctor he would never walk again. And he'd never tried to walk again for 5 years because he was told it didn't hurt. And every time he moved, it hurt in his hip. So he figured his hip was still a mess. So he took this, he was so excited about it. He read through his entire cognitive behavioral manual. And then one day he was sitting there waiting for somebody to help him put away some groceries, and he couldn't take it anymore. And so he just decided he was going to try to stand up, and he did, and he was fine. And then he retrained himself to walk over the course of the next week, came into cognitive behavioral therapy and scared his therapist half to death by standing up, say, "Hey doc, look, I can walk again," right? It's not common practice, but sometimes what's holding people back is just a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of what they're feeling. And so sometimes just understanding that in itself can change both how you practice and how your patients react. So just to emphasize this, so this is the circuit that people typically get taught about when you're talking about pain. So this is your spinal cord. There are nerves that go out to the periphery, and they get all sorts of information about inflammation, temperature, heat, everything bad that could happen to your tissue, they have a sensor for. That information gets sent in up through your brain, up to your sensory components of your thalamus, and that input gets sent to somatosensory cortex. And this tells you, like, where do you hurt and what type of pain is it, and all sorts of important things for figuring out, what you need to move when you're burning your hand on the stove, that sort of thing. And these circuits, they learn very, very effectively. The more input that comes in, the better they get at feeling pain in those areas, the better they get at transmitting those signals. So just like, practice with anything, if you experience things enough times, your somatosensory circuits are going to get really, really good at detecting that sort of problem, because it's probably a common problem in your environment. At least that's what your brain thinks. But the other circuit that people haven't talked that much about is, all right, I've lost my little dots. Okay, if you look on the third slide, they're coming in those same nerves are a whole circuit that delivers information not to your sensory circuits, but to your autonomic nervous system, to your stress systems, and to your emotional learning systems and your reward learning systems. So the parts of your brain that reshape your behavior, your habit behavior, not your conscious behavior, the stuff that you're going to kind of just do without thinking. It reshapes your stress responses, so it changes how your body reacts to stress, makes you better at getting stressed in potentially threatening situations. It reshapes what your fear learning systems. It changes what you're scared of. It helps you avoid things that maybe would put you in danger or make you feel pain. And it changes even the way your body reacts to threats. And this information doesn't get sent to your somatosensory cortex. Oh, I'm sorry, this doesn't work. But you can see it sends information up to completely different cortical area. Two main parts, your insular cortex and your cingulate cortex, which focus most on punishment learning and interpreting emotional reactions. So learning in both these circuits are going to have a big impact. Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, that's better. Okay, so this is what I basically just said. The one thing that I didn't mention is, while in acute pain, right, all of these signals get sent through those sensory pathways. Even in acute pain, they're still getting information from other areas. So if you are scared and something pokes you, it's going to hurt a lot more than if you're not, right? If you know you're safe and you get poked, it hurts less. And I have a fear of needles. I'm really not a big needle person. And I can promise you that if I'm paying attention to what they're doing and I'm kind of freaked out at the time, or I'm stressed out because I'm having a bad day, it hurts really bad and I really don't want to be there. But if I kind of ignore them and think about something else, you hardly feel it at all, right? And so what you experience has just as much to do with what else is going on in your head as it does to the intensity of the stimulus itself. And then one thing important to know is opiates work on these sensory circuits, but they work on actually all the circuits, which is kind of interesting. They're distributed basically to dampen pain in any one of these areas. So they can turn down the sensory pain. They also turn down the emotional pain. And all the different places that input, almost all of them are regulated by opiates. And one of the weird, bizarre things about opiate pharmacology is you can actually go in almost anywhere in the brain, put a little bit of opiates right there, just enough to work in that one area and hugely reduce pain, right? So they don't require action everywhere. If you just shut down the input in any one of these tiny places that are all getting summed up to tell you about what your pain experiences are, you can massively reduce pain. So it's really this summation experience that I think people don't think about that much. Okay, and when you get an injury, right, what an injury is you get a lot of input through one place over and over again. And that input itself is going to change those sensory circuits. It can make them, as I said, more sensitive, called hyperalgesia, so they have more pain when you have pain, and allodynia, which is pain when there's not even anything noxious coming out and touching you. But what happens when you have that injury is that your brain just keeps learning, right? It learns and learns and learns. And what you can find is that over time, as pain becomes chronic, while originally, okay, what this is, if you look at the light brown box, those are people who just developed back pain. The black bars are people who've had that back pain for over 3 months. And what you find is that if you look at if you just go do the exact same stimulus on these people while doing fMRI, so you do a stimulus to the back that causes them pain, at the start of their injury, that mostly activates these sensory circuits, right? It's mostly a sensory experience. 3 months later, there's much less activation in your sensory circuits, but there's huge activation in the emotional circuits and the reward learning circuits in response to that pain stimulus. So what happens is, as pain becomes chronic, as you learn with this repeated injury, different parts of your brain wind up maintaining that pain, right? It's no longer mostly a sensory problem. It's not mostly related to the injury. It's related to the learning that's happened in your emotional and reward learning circuits, and that's what's maintaining the pain. So what does that learning look like? Well, I'm going to focus on two main circuits that do a lot of learning, that have been strongly implicated in the chronification of pain, if you want to call it that. It's patient pain staying for a long period of time and never going away. And interestingly, there's been psychological therapies that are highly effective have been talking about this for ages, and just recently neuroscience kind of caught up and can show why this happens. So we knew the treatment before we knew the why, but I'm going to go through and explain the why in hopes of making this a little more clear. So two very simple concepts that drive most of this is first and fairly obviously, pain is a punishment, right? So when you experience pain, there are circuits that are there to help you learn what to do when you're being punished, right? And those circuits, the main things that they do are they trigger fear learning. So one, they train you what to be scared about, when to feel threatened and when to get nervous. They also teach you avoidance behaviors. So they train you to get away from any situation where you've experienced pain before. The last thing I do that I didn't put in here, which is much more of a cortical effect, is they also trigger your brain to try new things, right? So when you experience a punishment, one of the things that it's supposed to do is make you not do that again, right? Like, let's go try something else the next time I'm in a similar context. So there are punishment circuits that drive learning of all in those directions. There's a completely separate circuit, and I'm going to emphasize that it's important that it's a separate circuit for when I'm explaining later. In this circuit, these are your reward learning circuits. And the interesting thing that people don't think about very much is that pain relief is a reward, right? So if you have pain and it goes away, that triggers reward learning. Your reward learning circuits, and we're going to talk a lot about them, these are the ones that have been massively implicated in drug addiction. These are the things that cause you to develop patterns of behavior where you repeat them over and over and over again to make yourself feel better in the next 10 minutes, regardless of what's happening to you downstream. And pain relief activates these circuits in the same way. The goal of these circuits is to trigger approach to things. So you're supposed to gravitate to contexts where you got relief before, and find things that are going to make you better. And so what happens is as you experience, so let's say, most people's pain are not nice and stable. You don't have a pain of 5 at all points in time. Like it ebbs and flows, right? It gets a little better now, get a little worse now, up and down, so on and so forth. Every time your pain drifts, it's triggering learning, right? Every time it gets worse, that's a punishment. Every time it gets better, that's a reward. And that starts shaping your habits. And these habits are not just behavioral habits, they're habits of emotion, they're habits of thought. They change how you tend to think and behave and emote over time. And it's a lot of this training that leads to the ongoing pain and the ongoing disability. And these can persist, in the complete absence of tissue injury.